The day my package vanished was the day my HOA turned into a crime scene. Heather Caldwell is screaming at me on my own porch, waving a blurry printout in my face and jabbing her finger at my chest. She says a neighbor's car was rummaged through last night, and she saw my silhouette on a doorbell camera. And now she is going to have private security confront me publicly, unless I admit what I took. I am a security technician. I live in Cedar Springs, a lakefront neighborhood in Las Vegas with strict guest rules and a gate. And this accusation is about to destroy my relationship because the stress has already been constant for months. I hold up both hands and keep my voice level. I tell her I was not anywhere near the package locker lot last night. I was home the entire evening, and I have no idea what she is talking about. She cuts me off and taps the plastic badge clipped to her tan rain jacket. She says I am authorized to enforce this, and she does not need to explain herself to someone who already violated community trust. Her voice is sharp and loud enough that I see two neighbors across the street slow down and turn to watch. She pulls a second sheet from the stack of orange warning tags tucked under her arm and slaps it against my door frame. She says this is going on file, and if I do not cooperate, she will make sure the tow company gets a call about my vehicle parked in a guest spot without the right sticker. I ask her to show me the full image. She folds the printout in half and shoves it back into her pocket. She says she already submitted everything to management, and she does not have to justify her process to me. I ask her when she submitted it, and she repeats the same line, slower this time, like I am the one being unreasonable. I pull out my phone and open my calendar to show her I was on a work call until 10 last night, but she waves it away and says digital records can be faked. She taps her badge again and tells me I can fine you daily until you give up, and then she turns and walks back down the path toward the main road. I stand there for a moment, my heart hammering, and I realize she never actually showed me the photo. I go inside and sit down at my kitchen table with my phone. I text my girlfriend and tell her Heather just accused me of breaking into someone's car. She replies immediately asking if I am serious, and I can already feel the weight of her doubt pressing through the screen. She says this is the third time this year the HOA has come after us, and she does not know how much more of this she can handle. I tell her I will fix it, but I do not know how yet. I work as a security technician, so I know how easy it is to doctor a timestamp or crop a frame to make someone look guilty. I also know Heather Caldwell, the enforcement liaison for Cedar Springs, has been escalating her harassment for months. She started with parking complaints that made no sense, then moved on to guest access violations that were not violations at all, and now she is accusing me of theft. The neighborhood is nice, lakefront views, palm trees, a staffed gate, but the HOA culture is suffocating. Every rule is weaponized, every interaction is a power play, and Heather is the enforcer who loves the role too much. 2 hours later, I get a knock on my door. I open it and find Heather standing there again. But this time she has a handheld printer balanced on her forearm. She hits a button, and a fresh sheet starts feeding out. She hands it to me before the ink is even dry. She says this is an official violation notice, and the accusation is now on record with Cedar Springs management. I scan the page and see a generic template with a checked box next to unauthorized access to common property, and a line that says subject reported on video near vehicle tampering incident. There is no video still, no timestamp, no case number. I ask her where the actual evidence is, and she says it is with management and I can request it through the proper channels. She taps her badge again and says I am authorized to enforce this. I tell her I want to see the submission she claims she already filed. She takes a half step back and her tone shifts to something colder. She says I need to focus on clearing my name instead of questioning her process. I ask her what process, because so far all I have seen is a blurry printout she will not share and a notice she printed on my porch. She raises her voice and says if I keep pushing, she will escalate to a formal hearing, and that will cost me a lot more than just paying the fine now. I hold the fresh notice up and ask her what fine, because the page does not list an amount. She ignores the question and says the management office closes at 4, and I have one shot to deliver a dispute packet in person if I want to avoid a default judgment. I close the door and immediately call the management office. The receptionist picks up, and I explain that I just received a violation notice for something I did not do, and I need to see the evidence Heather submitted. She puts me on hold for 3 minutes, then comes back and says there is no file under my address for any recent submission. I ask her to double-check, and she says she already looked, and if Heather filed something, it has not been scanned into the system yet. I ask how long that usually takes, and she says it should be same day if it was submitted this morning. She adds that I cannot dispute anything unless I pay the processing fee first, which is $75, non-refundable, and required before they will even review my case. I hang up and stare at the notice again. Heather said she already submitted everything, but the office has no record. Either she lied about filing it, or she is deliberately holding it back to keep me in limbo. I grab my keys and my manila folder that is already bulging with old notices and receipts from past HOA disputes. I drive to the management office, which is a small building near the main gate. I walk in, and the receptionist glances up. I tell her I am here to file a dispute, and I need to see any documentation related to my address. She slides a clipboard across the counter with a form attached, and says I need to fill that out and pay first. I fill out the form and hand her my card. She processes the payment and prints a receipt. I ask again about the file, and she pulls up my account on her screen. She scrolls for a moment and then says there is nothing here except the payment I just made. I ask if she can check Heather's submissions directly, and she shakes her head. She says enforcement liaisons submit through a portal, and if it is not showing up, that means it was not uploaded. I thank her and leave, and I realize Heather is running a bluff. She printed a notice to make it look official, but she has not actually filed anything because she knows the video does not exist or does not show what she claims. I drive back home and start making calls. I text my neighbor Marcus, who lives 3 doors down and was previously framed by Heather for a landscaping violation that turned out to be completely fabricated. He kept every email, every receipt, every photo, and he won his dispute after proving she altered the submission date on a complaint. He replies within 5 minutes and says he will come over tonight. He adds that Heather tried the same move on him last year, claiming she had video of his contractor dumping debris. But when he demanded the file, she kept changing the story until it fell apart. That evening, Marcus shows up with a thick binder. He sits down at my kitchen table and flips it open. He says Heather has a pattern. She accuses people of violations, prints fake notices to scare them into paying, and then drags out the process until they either give up or move. He points to a page in his binder that shows 3 different complaint forms, all with the same wording, the same checked boxes, and the same generic timestamps. He says that is her template. She fills in the name and address, prints it, and calls it evidence. He tells me to request a full audit of any submission she claims to have made, because if the portal log does not match her story, management has to discipline her. I take notes and ask him what happened with his case. He says it took 2 months, but eventually the HOA had to admit there was no video and no valid complaint. Heather got a warning, but she kept her role because the board did not want the drama of removing her. He says the only reason he won was because he had a witness who saw her print the notice on the spot and hand it to him, just like she did to me. The next morning, I get another knock. I open the door and Heather is there with 2 sheets of paper clipped together. She hands them to me and says the board has authorized a formal investigation, and I am required to hand over my phone for inspection. I tell her that is not happening, and she raises her voice. She says if I refuse, it will be treated as an admission of guilt. I ask her who authorized this, and she taps her badge and repeats I am authorized to enforce this. I tell her to leave, and she steps closer. She says she has a contractor who will testify they saw me near the package locker lot the night of the incident, and if I do not cooperate, she will make sure that testimony goes on record. I close the door and lock it. I text Marcus and tell him Heather is escalating. He replies immediately and says do not give her anything, and do not let her intimidate you. He adds that her contractor threat is probably fake, because she tried the same thing on another neighbor last year and the contractor refused to lie for her. I sit down and start going through the folder again. I pull out the violation notice she printed yesterday and compare it to the forms Marcus showed me. The layout is identical. The checked boxes are in the same spots. The wording is word for word the same except for my name and address. I take a photo of the forms side by side and text it to Marcus. He calls me back within a minute. He says that is it. That is the proof. If I can show management that she is using the same template for multiple fake complaints, they will have to act. He tells me to go back to the office and request a copy of the portal submission log for the last 6 months. He says if Heather is mass-producing complaints, the log will show duplicate uploads or missing entries, and that is enough to prove she is fabricating records. I drive back to the management office. The receptionist recognizes me and looks uncomfortable. I tell her I need a copy of the enforcement portal log for my address and any submissions made by Heather Caldwell. She hesitates and says that is not a standard request. I tell her I already paid the dispute fee, and I have a right to see the records related to my case. She picks up the phone and calls someone in the back. After a brief conversation, she hangs up and says the property manager will be out in a minute. A woman in her 50s comes out from the back office. She introduces herself as Linda and asks what I need. I explain the situation, the accusation, the notice that was printed on my porch, and the fact that there is no file in the system. I show her the side-by-side photos of the complaint forms. Linda takes my phone and studies the images. Her expression shifts from neutral to concerned. She hands the phone back and says she will pull the log, but it may take a day or two. I tell her I do not have a day or two because Heather is threatening to escalate, and she is claiming she already submitted everything. Linda nods slowly and says she will expedite it. I leave the office and drive home. When I pull into my driveway, I see Heather standing near the mailbox cluster at the end of the block. She is talking to a man in a gray uniform with a logo on his chest. I recognize the uniform. It is the private security company that patrols the neighborhood. I park and walk down the street toward them. Heather sees me and points. She says there he is, that is the one I told you about. The security guard looks at me and asks if I live here. I say yes and give him my address. He asks if I was near the package locker lot 2 nights ago, and I say no. I was home. Heather interrupts and says I am lying, and she has proof. If you are enjoying this wild ride, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories where the revenge is legal and the karma is public. The guard asks Heather to show him the proof. She pulls out the folded printout from her pocket and hands it to him. He unfolds it and studies it for a few seconds. He looks back at me and then at Heather. He says this is too blurry to identify anyone, and he cannot take action based on this. Heather's face goes red. She taps her badge and says I am authorized to enforce this, and if he does not do his job, she will report him to his supervisor. The guard folds the printout and hands it back. He says, "Ma'am, I need clear evidence or a police report before I can confront a resident." Heather raises her voice and says she does not need a police report because the HOA has jurisdiction here. The guard shakes his head and says that is not how this works, and he walks away. Heather turns to me and says this is not over. She says she is going to the board, and she is going to make sure I am removed from the community. I tell her to do whatever she needs to do, because I did not steal anything and I have proof. She laughs and says my proof is fabricated and I need to stop showing it. I ask her what she means by showing it, because I have not shown anything to anyone except Marcus and the management office. She does not answer. She just turns and walks away. I go back to my place and call Marcus. I tell him what just happened, and he says Heather is panicking. He says when she starts threatening to go to the board, it means she knows she is losing. He tells me to keep gathering evidence and to make sure everything is documented. I ask him if he still has the contact info for the contractor who refused to lie for Heather, and he says yes. He texts me the number a minute later. I call the contractor. His name is Tony, and he runs a small landscaping company. I explain who I am and what is happening. He remembers Heather immediately. He says she tried to get him to sign a statement saying he saw me dumping trash near the lake access path, but he refused because he was not even working in the neighborhood that day. He says she got angry and threatened to blacklist his company from Cedar Springs jobs, but he told her to go ahead. He adds that she pulled the same move on 2 other contractors he knows, and both of them refused as well. I ask Tony if he would be willing to give me a written statement, and he says yes. He tells me to email him the details, and he will type something up tonight. I thank him and hang up. I sit down and draft an email outlining the accusation, the blurry photo, the fake notice, and Heather's threats. I send it to Tony and copy Marcus for backup. The next morning, I get a call from Linda at the management office. She says she pulled the portal log, and there is a problem. She says Heather submitted 3 complaints under my address in the last 2 months, but only one of them has an attachment, and that attachment is a blank PDF. The other 2 submissions have no attachments at all. Linda says according to the log, Heather uploaded all 3 on the same day, within 5 minutes of each other. She adds that the system flags duplicate uploads, and Heather has been flagged 17 times in the last year. I ask Linda what that means, and she says it means Heather has been mass-producing complaints. Linda tells me to come in and pick up a printed copy of the log and she will forward it to the board. I ask if this is enough to stop Heather, and Linda says it should be, but the board moves slowly. I thank her and drive to the office. Linda hands me a folder with the log inside. I flip through the pages and see highlighted entries showing Heather's name, my address, and the flagged uploads. The pattern is undeniable. I take the folder home and add it to the growing stack of evidence. That afternoon, I get a text from Marcus. He says Heather just posted on the neighborhood Facebook group claiming that a thief is operating in Cedar Springs and that management is refusing to act. The post does not name me directly, but it is obvious who she is talking about. I open the group and read the post. Several neighbors have already commented asking for details, and Heather is replying with vague statements about evidence she cannot share due to an ongoing investigation. I screenshot the post and the comments. Marcus texts again and says she is trying to turn the neighborhood against you before you can clear your name. He tells me to respond publicly with facts, but to keep it calm and factual. I draft a reply. I say I was falsely accused of a theft I did not commit. I have requested the evidence multiple times and it does not exist, and I am working with management to resolve the issue. I post it and wait. Within 10 minutes, Heather replies. She says I am deflecting, and the evidence is with the board. She says if I am innocent, I should have no problem submitting to a formal hearing. I reply again and say I have asked for a hearing, but management has no record of her submitting the required documentation. I attach a cropped screenshot of the email Linda sent me confirming there is no valid file. Heather does not reply after that, but 2 neighbors comment asking why the evidence has not been shared yet. The next day, I get an email from Linda. She says the board reviewed the portal log and has scheduled a meeting to discuss Heather's conduct. She adds that I am invited to attend as a witness, but the meeting is not about my case specifically. I reply and ask if that means my accusation is dropped, and she says not yet, but the board is aware of the situation. I forward the email to Marcus and he calls me immediately. He says this is good, but I need to be ready to present everything in person. He tells me to bring the folder, the screenshots, Tony's statement, and anything else that shows Heather is fabricating complaints. Tony emails me his statement that evening. It is a one-page letter on his company letterhead explaining that Heather approached him in March and asked him to sign a false statement about me. He writes that he refused, and she threatened to blacklist his business. He includes his contact info and offers to testify if needed. I print the letter and add it to the folder. 2 days later, I am standing outside the clubhouse waiting for the board meeting to start. The meeting is not inside the main room. It is scheduled for a private session in a back office. Linda meets me at the door and says the board wants to hear from me first before they talk to Heather. I follow her inside. 3 board members are seated at a table. Linda introduces me and I sit down. One of the board members, an older man named Richard, asks me to explain the situation. I open the folder and walk them through everything. The blurry photo Heather refused to share, the notice she printed on my porch, the missing file in the system, the portal log showing flagged uploads, the identical complaint templates, and Tony's statement. I show them the screenshots of Heather's Facebook post and my responses. Richard listens without interrupting. When I finish, he asks if I have any direct proof that I was not near the package locker lot the night of the alleged theft. I pull out my phone and show him my work call log with timestamps, and I explain that I was on a client call from 8 to 10 that night. Richard nods and says they will review the evidence. He asks me to wait outside while they bring Heather in. I step out into the hallway and sit on a bench. 10 minutes later, Heather walks past me without making eye contact. She goes into the office and the door closes. I can hear raised voices through the wall, but I cannot make out the words. After about 20 minutes, the door opens and Heather storms out. Her face is red and she is clutching her badge and a stack of papers. She does not look at me. She walks straight out of the building. Linda comes out a moment later and motions for me to come back in. Richard tells me the board has reviewed the evidence and has determined that Heather violated multiple HOA policies, including filing false complaints, threatening vendors, and misusing her enforcement authority. He says her role as enforcement liaison has been suspended pending a full investigation. He adds that my fees will be refunded, and the accusation against me is officially dismissed. He says the HOA will also issue a formal apology and will be reviewing all of Heather's past submissions for similar issues. I thank him and leave the office. I walk out into the parking lot and call Marcus. I tell him it is over, and he cheers. He says he knew the evidence would hold up. I ask him what happens next, and he says Heather will probably appeal, but without her badge and without board support, she has no power. He tells me to keep the folder in case she tries anything else. Over the next week, I start hearing from other neighbors. 2 of them reach out to say they were also accused by Heather of violations that turned out to be fake. One of them says she paid 3 fines before she realized the complaints were fabricated. Another neighbor tells me Heather tried to get him to hand over a package she claimed was delivered to the wrong address. But he refused and later found out she was stealing packages and reselling the contents online. The board launches a full audit of Heather's activities. Within 2 weeks, they uncover a pattern of theft and fraud. Heather had been taking labeled bins of event supplies from the clubhouse storage closet and selling them at local resale shops. She had been skimming petty cash from vendor payments. She had been rummaging through cars in the guest lot and taking anything that looked valuable. The same complaint template I found appears in dozens of files, all targeting residents who questioned her or refused to pay bogus fines. The board refers the case to the police. A detective interviews me and several other neighbors. I hand over copies of the folder, including the portal log and Tony's statement. The detective says Heather is facing charges for theft, fraud, and harassment. He adds that the HOA's vendor, the private security company, has already terminated their contract with Cedar Springs because they do not want to be associated with the case. A month later, I get a check in the mail from the HOA. It is a full refund of the dispute fee, plus reimbursement for the fines I paid on the fake violations from earlier in the year. The check comes with a letter from the board apologizing for the harassment and confirming that Heather is no longer affiliated with Cedar Springs in any capacity. The letter also states that the board has implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar abuse in the future. I text Marcus and tell him the check arrived. He replies congratulations and says justice served. I sit down at my kitchen table and look at the folder one last time. The vendor invoice trail that proved who ordered and received the missing supplies. The doorbell camera clip that showed Heather near the cars on the night of the thefts. The portal log that exposed the mass-produced fake complaints. And Tony's statement that destroyed her credibility. All of it together was enough to bring her down. My girlfriend comes home that evening and I show her the check and the letter. She reads it, and her shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. She says she is glad it is over, and she is sorry she doubted me. I tell her it is okay, because the pressure was designed to make people doubt. That is how people like Heather operate. They weaponize stress and confusion until you break or give up. A few weeks later, I run into the security guard who refused to confront me that day near the mailbox cluster. He is picking up a shift at a different community nearby. He recognizes me and asks how everything turned out. I tell him the HOA dropped the case and Heather was removed. He nods and says he is glad, because he knew something was off when she could not provide clear evidence. He adds that contractors and vendors talk, and word got around fast that Cedar Springs had a problem. He says the company pulled their patrol contract because they did not want the liability. I ask him what happened the day Heather tried to pressure him. He says she kept insisting he had to act immediately. But he has been doing security work for 10 years and he knows the difference between a real incident and someone trying to weaponize his presence. He says she threatened to call his supervisor, but when he told her to go ahead, she backed down. He says if he had confronted me that day without real evidence, he could have lost his job and opened the company to a lawsuit. At the end of the month, the board holds a neighborhood meeting to address the situation publicly. I attend with Marcus. The board president reads a prepared statement explaining that an enforcement liaison abused her authority, that multiple residents were targeted with false accusations, and that the board has taken corrective action. He does not name Heather directly, but everyone knows. He announces that all disputed fines related to her complaints will be refunded, and that the board is reviewing the enforcement process to add transparency and accountability. After the meeting, a contractor I have never met approaches me. He introduces himself as Dave and says he heard about what happened. He tells me Heather tried to drag him into a fake complaint last year, claiming he left debris in a common area, but he had photos proving he cleaned everything. He says she dropped it when he threatened to sue, but he always wondered how many other people she targeted who did not have proof. He says he is glad someone finally stood up to her with evidence she could not ignore. I go home that night and delete the Facebook screenshots from my phone. I file the folder in a cabinet in case I ever need it again, but I do not expect to. The stress that has been grinding me down for months is finally gone. My girlfriend and I sit on the porch and watch the sunset over the lake. She says it feels like we can breathe again, and I agree. A few days later, I see a post on the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone shares a photo of Heather's enforcement badge lying on a table at the management office with a note saying confiscated per board directive. The comments are a mix of relief and anger. Several neighbors admit they paid fines they should not have because they were too scared to fight back. One person says they are filing a small claims case to recover money they lost. Another says they are just glad she is gone. I do not comment on the post. I already said everything I needed to say. The evidence spoke louder than any argument I could make. The vendor invoice trail that showed Heather ordered the stolen supplies under a fake work order. The doorbell camera clip from a neighbor who caught her on video near the cars the night of the thefts. The portal audit log that proved she was mass-producing fake violations. The contractor statements that showed she tried to coerce false testimony. All of it together painted a clear picture of someone who abused power for personal gain and tried to silence anyone who questioned her. The final piece of closure comes a month later. I get a letter from the district attorney's office confirming that Heather has been charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and harassment. The letter includes a case number and contact info for the victim advocate assigned to the case. It says I may be called as a witness if the case goes to trial, but the prosecutor is confident they have enough evidence for a plea deal. I call Marcus and read him the letter. He says it is about time, and he hopes she gets the maximum penalty. I tell him I just want it to be over. He says it is over, at least for us. He adds that the board is holding an election next month to fill Heather's position, and he is thinking about running. He says someone needs to make sure the enforcement process is fair, and after everything that happened, he wants to be part of the solution. I tell him I will vote for him, and I mean it. Marcus kept receipts when Heather came after him, and those receipts helped me build my case. Without his binder, without his advice, I might have given up and paid the fines just to make it stop. Instead, I fought back with facts, and the system, slow and frustrating as it was, eventually worked. The neighborhood feels different now. People are more willing to question notices and ask for documentation. The board is slower to take action without proof. The new enforcement process requires all complaints to include photo evidence with timestamps, and all submissions are logged and audited monthly. It is not perfect, but it is better. I still see the security guard occasionally when he picks up shifts nearby. We nod at each other, and that is enough. I know he did the right thing that day when he refused to pressure me based on a blurry photo. Heather tried to weaponize his authority, and he shut it down. That moment, more than anything, showed me that not everyone in the system is willing to play along with abuse. My girlfriend and I are still here at Cedar Springs. We talked about moving, but we decided to stay. The neighborhood is nice when the HOA is not harassing you, and now that Heather is gone, it feels livable again. We even started using the clubhouse pool again, something we avoided for months because Heather would always find a reason to issue a warning. The stolen event supplies were never fully recovered, but the vendor who originally provided them sent the board an invoice showing exactly what Heather ordered and when. That invoice, combined with the resale shop receipts the police found during their investigation, proved she had been stealing for at least a year. The board settled with the vendor and updated their inventory system to prevent future theft. I kept Tony's contact info, and I referred him to 2 neighbors who needed landscaping work. He thanked me and said business has been good since word got out that he refused to lie for Heather. Integrity, it turns out, is a selling point in a neighborhood that just went through a corruption scandal. The board issued a formal apology to everyone Heather targeted. It came with refunds, but more importantly, it came with acknowledgement that the system failed. That acknowledgement mattered. It meant the board understood they gave someone too much power without oversight, and they were taking responsibility for fixing it. I do not check the neighborhood Facebook group much anymore. It is quieter now, fewer complaints, fewer accusations, fewer people weaponizing the rules. The culture is shifting, slowly, towards something more reasonable. People are still reporting actual violations, broken sprinklers, cars blocking fire lanes, but the weaponized enforcement is mostly gone. Marcus won the election. He is the new enforcement liaison, and he is doing it the right way. He asks for evidence, he follows up with residents before issuing notices, and he keeps detailed logs of every interaction. He told me last week that he has not issued a single violation yet because every complaint he has reviewed so far was either resolved through a conversation or turned out to be a misunderstanding. Heather took a plea deal. She avoided jail time but was sentenced to probation, community service, and restitution. She is banned from holding any HOA position in Nevada for 10 years. The case made the local news briefly, a short segment about HOA corruption and abuse of power. The reporter interviewed me and Marcus, and we both emphasized the importance of documentation and standing up to false accusations. I still have the folder, tucked away in the cabinet. I do not look at it often, but knowing it is there gives me peace of mind. If anyone ever tries to pull the same move again, I know exactly what to do. Document everything, ask for proof, and do not back down when the evidence is on your side. The management office is under new leadership. Linda retired, and the new property manager is younger and more responsive. She implemented an online portal where residents can track complaints and see the status of investigations in real time. It is not perfect, but it is transparent, and transparency makes abuse harder. I ran into a neighbor last week who I had never spoken to before. She stopped me near the mailbox cluster and thanked me. She said she was one of the people Heather targeted, and she paid 2 fines she should not have because she did not know how to fight back. She said seeing me stand up to Heather with evidence gave her the courage to file for a refund, and the board approved it. She said it mattered that someone finally said no and made it stick. That conversation reminded me why I fought. It was not just about clearing my name. It was about stopping someone who was hurting people and getting away with it, because most people did not have the time, energy, or knowledge to push back. Heather weaponized complexity and intimidation, and she counted on people giving up. I did not give up, and that made all the difference. The lake is beautiful this time of year. The palm trees sway in the breeze, and the water reflects the sunset in shades of orange and pink. My girlfriend and I sit on the porch most evenings now, and we do not talk about the HOA anymore. We talk about work, about weekend plans, about normal things that normal people talk about when they are not being harassed by a corrupt enforcement liaison. The stress is gone. The constant dread of finding another notice on my door is gone. The fear that Heather would escalate until she destroyed my reputation or my finances is gone. She tried to bury me with fake complaints and public shaming, and instead, she buried herself with her own lies. I think about the security guard sometimes, the way he looked at that blurry printout and said this is not enough. That moment was pivotal. If he had caved to Heather's pressure, if he had confronted me in front of the neighbors without evidence, it would have been so much harder to clear my name. But he stood his ground, and that gave me time to gather proof and build a case. I think about Marcus and his binder, the hours he spent documenting every interaction with Heather, every email, every receipt, every photo. He did that work for himself, but it ended up saving me too. That is the power of keeping records. You never know when you will need them, but when you do, they are everything. I think about Tony and the other contractors who refused to lie. They had no obligation to help me, but they did, because they knew what Heather was doing was wrong. Their integrity cost them nothing and gave me everything. And I think about the board, slow and frustrating as they were, because in the end, they did the right thing. They reviewed the evidence, they removed Heather, they refunded the fees, and they changed the system. It took too long, but it happened. Justice is not always fast, but when it comes, it is worth the wait. Heather lost her badge, her authority, her reputation, and her freedom. The HOA's vendor demanded proper documentation and stopped taking her calls. Management confiscated her props and kicked her out. And I got my life back. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.